starting today's session, I want to welcome everyone back to our second day of the 4th International Conference, and today's theme is Inclusive Living Options in the Community. Our sessions today are going to focus on movements across the Global South and Global North towards social and community care and inclusive support models, community services, integration of care, development of psychosocial care, the continued protection of human rights, the strengths and learnings that can be shared between public and private organizations, and how we can successfully do the work that we do and serve the people that we serve. We appreciate your presence again here this morning and the presence of our esteemed speakers and participants who we'll invite up to stage the rest of the day to share their thoughts, insights, and most importantly, highlight the work that they do. So I'm going to start the session this morning by inviting my colleague, not yet doctor, very soon to be Dr. Deepika Easwaran from the Banyan, to talk about the first session and present the panelists. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We'll now begin the first session on experiential comparisons of long-term supported inclusive living. First, we have a taped video from Dr. Karlee Silva, who unfortunately could not join us today. Dr. Silva is the CEO of Grand Challenges Canada, a mission-driven leader committed to addressing inequity through innovation, power shifting, and partnerships.
Iterate and transition to scale the Home Again model over the last decade. And I want to thank the Government of Canada and the Government of the UK for their support to make this happen. I've been fortunate to visit the Home Again homes several times, and what struck me each time was how much it felt like a warm hug. The homes were incorporated in communities, the individuals were incorporated into families, and what resulted were smiles. I'm struck by the bold premise that the Banyan operates on, celebrating and supporting every person's gifts, despite or perhaps because of the challenges that they also live, their mental health challenges that they also live with. I'm also a champion of Home Again because the results speak for themselves. This is not just a nice idea that is operated in a small context. Since we've started supporting the Banyan to test and scale Home Again, it has gone from 12 homes to 127 homes. It's gone from one state in India to almost 10 states across 3 different countries. And there has been meaningful impact and improvement for those who participate in Home Again in their quality of life, in their community integration, and in their disability scores. And of course, not to mention the fact that Home Again is a cost-effective model compared to institutional care. So it's kinder, it's effective, and it's cheaper. I'm not sure what else you could ask for. This is a bold idea, delivering big impact. We're excited to cheer on the Banyan with this new phase of support that we're providing, and really encourage any officials looking to meaningfully care for their citizens' mental health to invest in the Home Again model. Thanks very much.
What Dr. Karlee mentioned in just a bit with more about Home Again. But before we do that, we will kickstart today's symposium with Dr. Roberto Mezzina and Dr. Pina Ridente, who will speak with us more about the Trieste approach in Italy. Dr. Mezzina and Dr. Pina, could we have you on stage, please? Dr. Mezzina is a psychiatrist and chair of the International Mental Health Collaborating Network. He has been the director of the Department of Mental Health in Trieste, Italy, between 2012 and 2019, and from 2009 to 2019, the head of the WHO Collaborating Center for Research and Training, based in Trieste. He also supported the development of community-based services across the globe and has consulted on several reform policies. Dr. Pina Ridente is the official trainer of Open Dialogue, a senior psychiatrist with over 40 years of experience in the Trieste Mental Health Department in Italy, and has contributed as an expert WHO consultant to projects for the deinstitutionalization of psychiatric hospitals and the development of community services in several countries. We're so happy to have both of you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be here on stage again. We will share the presentation in 2 parts. The first will be a quick overview of the reform in Italy and particularly the development of services in Trieste. which was at the forefront of the reform. And then Pina will go more in depth into the aspects of psychosocial rehabilitation and housing work in our model. So that's Trieste is known because it was the first experience in Italy to close a psychiatric hospital successfully in 1980, started in 1971, so it took 9 years, under the direction of Franco Basaglia, famous, important pioneer, and he moved from a narrow medical model that was adopted in Italian asylums to a wider concept based on the whole person and whole life. So this paved the way to the national reform law in 1978 with a demonstration that it was feasible to overcome the psychiatric hospitals. And so the creation of mental health department, which is encompassing all the services in a given community in Italy. So each territory is organized on a mental health department. And this also was recognized as a World Health Organization example, successful example of reform. So it became a collaborating center from 1987 on. That's the snapshot of the Italian reform. So we had 2 waves of deinstitutionalization. The first started with a condition where in 1971 there were 100,000 roughly patients, so probably 96,000 is the correct number. And then as a result of a process of active engagement of the clinicians within the hospital, even before the reform law, this number was halved to 48,000 in 78 when the reform came. And all psychiatric hospitals were closed, but it took 21 years to do this. So it was a long process that was completed in 2000, in 1999 precisely. And the new reform law was forbidding no psychiatric hospitals to be constructed, also no psychiatric hospital admissions, or community-based care as a rule, and a strong human rights focus with involuntary treatment duration reduced roughly to 1 week, can be reconfirmed for another week, but the average in Italy is 10 days. So this is very much in favor of preventing long-term institutionalization. And it's very protecting the right to health. It's not linked to the judgment of dangerousness or risk. The involuntary treatment is connected to the protection of health for the person. The second wave a few years ago was related to the closure of the 6 big forensic hospitals that we had in the country, very much backward again, and so declared as a scandal, and so there was an indignation, and it resulted into the creation of a new set of smaller regional units, no more than 20 beds, each one of them, which are varying in terms of being closed or opened or managed, but anyway, they definitely overcome the previous organization with the forensic hospitals. And also the current problems there are, it's a number of problems related to the weakening community mental health services because of the current policies, the cuts in expenditures, loss of staff, the budget for mental health was going down from 36%, which was even low in 2015, to current 2.75. You can see this is not a percentage which can be comparable to other Western countries, particularly European ones. So it's very low. And most money spent in residential facilities. That's why Pina is explaining what is the work we were doing on this particular aspect. So the action of Basaglia was based, as I said today, on the idea of promoting freedom for people who were interned in the psychiatric hospitals, also overcoming the condition where illness was shaped by institution, people were institutionalized, even the feature of the illness were shaped by the institution. And also he started abolishing all forms of restraint, including people in a process of democratic management of the institutions, and also reconnecting with their social networks, with their family, trying to overcome the social mandate of mental health, of psychiatry as a matter of care and custody. And closing the asylum was clearly, from the beginning of Basaglia's action, the end point. He tried a number of different models like the therapeutic community from Maxwell Jones. He borrowed anyway the idea, and then the French sector, etc., and finally the community mental health centers that he studied in the USA when there was applied the Kennedy reform. So the reform law coronated all this process. Trieste closed the asylum and set up a new system of services. This is the condition where I left. When I left the department, I retired in 2019. We had 4 community mental health centers in a given catchment area, each one about 50, 60,000 inhabitants, so locally based, with 6 beds, each of them a small unit in general hospital, with just like ensuring that the continuity of care was then between hospital and community, but the focus was definitely on community, and a service for rehabilitation that Pina led for many years, that was also interacting with the NGOs, social cooperatives, associations, etc., to provide a co-produced mental health care. They are the partners. So that's one of the community mental health centers where I worked. Center of Barcola is a normal house. This is close to a very luxury hotel on the background, you see. And it's very strongly a value-based system of care. So with the person at the center, so not just treating the illness, but looking at the person. This was the Basali affirmation, putting the illness within parentheses, means that we don't deny the illness, but we look at the person, because sometimes diagnosis and psychiatry at large, they obscure, they hide the person. So respecting the service user as a citizen with rights that must maintain his social roles and staying within the social networks, fostering recovery and social inclusion at the same time, so not recovery as individual, but as a member of the community, addressing the practical needs of the person and change the attitude in general, the community through services. These values were transformed and operationalized, let's say, in criteria of work for the services, for the responsibility of the community, the active presence, a service which is very highly mobile, proactive, assertive, ensuring the therapeutic continuity in the community, even when the person is in crisis or responding to crisis in the community, providing comprehensive care that joins social aspects, the social drivers, social determinants, and clinical care in general. And doing this through a teamwork, not just multidisciplinary, but involving peers, users, and the family as a member of the, let's say, a comprehensive group that is the therapeutic group. So whole life approach. So the 24-hour community mental health center is the pillar of the organization. It's a hub for care in a given community where everyone can just walk in and receive care in real time. This is the effort to do it. It's a work by a group of professionals that operate within a common culture, a common view of mental health of that community, and also ensuring the shift from the concept of hospitalization to the concept of hospitality. That means if you are in crisis, you can be hosted in the mental health center for a limited period of time, and also assisted by the team that knows you, that know you, and also ensuring that there is a permeability with the community. That means that your family, your friends can visit you. There are no limits of inside and outside, but it's just a hub for the community service. In this way, avoiding locking the doors and using restraint methods, of course, you have a more liberal access. People are not frightened by being referred to a mental health facility, etc. So it's very important demonstration that this is a new, different way. And this is integrated service. That means based on individual needs, history, who is this person, which must be engaged in treatment. So establishing relationship is the first step. And this involves also then developing a comprehensive personalized plan of care with use of resources of the center and also trying to catalyze the resources of the community that's provided by other agencies or by the family themselves or the resources that we encounter along the way. So looking at the living situation, the money, the income, the personal care, work possibilities, free time, any aspect of life, not in a separate world, but in continuous ongoing interaction with what's coming up from the community opportunities. So we can talk about a sort of parallel empowerment because the clinicians, they overcome the typical hierarchical traditional organization of the hospital. They became all operators in the community, starting from nurses particularly. They changed their role very much. But this empowerment regarded, of course, the clients and the family. They became actively participating in care, involved in care. The peer support became very important, particularly in recent years when we developed the recovery house. And so the worker role changed very much. So we call this deinstitutionalizing relationships very much so with the clients and furthering this whole life approach. The expenditures are 1/3 of what could cost today a psychiatric hospital of the same size. So that's very encouraging, saying that we can even save money and provide a comprehensive care for a 5 times population. So it's 5,000 people every year are followed by the service instead of the 1,000 of the hospital. And unfortunately, it's a difficult moment now after COVID and after the changing policies. We are suffering from a number of attacks, and also the impoverishment of the team. So we hope that Trieste requires support internationally because also offers models to other organizations. This is one of the examples, Trimbos Institute from the Netherlands. They study the system. They say freedom first is the principle. So ensuring freedom is a first precondition for care, holistic approach, which is ecological, using the resources of the community, and looking at the rights, so legal approach, etc. So it's very much used by the community as a community model. This is the scheme you can find within the World Mental Health Report of the World Health Organization I mentioned yesterday, is a network of services that includes community mental health in general, healthcare, and mental health beyond the health sector. We tried to put this network in place and with the person at the center, going beyond the formal services, beyond the statutory services, including the resources of the community. And that's the way decentralization worked in Italy. This is another scheme of the World Health Organization. Scaling up services in the community is parallel to reducing the admissions and increasing discharge, so reducing the investment in institution and increasing at the same time the investment in the community. So that's the conclusion. It's a system of care, it's a system of opportunities. And I leave the floor to Pina, which will explain much better what is this person-centered care. Thank you.
So I would like to share with you some ideas about the social inclusion, mostly about the social inclusion, and we can say the part of rehabilitation, human development. And I would like to start from these 3 basic axes of the rehabilitation that are the 3 main points of the social determinants. It can sound a bit too basic, probably, but in reality it is not, because everywhere in the world, I think the social people, services, professionals speak a lot about social determinants, but in reality, not many of them. They really work on social determinants. Not the services that presented for sure yesterday, not the Banyan, I know quite well the services of Banyan, but everywhere this idea of really working on social determinants is not like something really fashionable, because the services, the professionals are now unfortunately very attracted from medical approach, biological approach, diagnosis, give the best drugs, and not work on the basis of the human rights, of the what is useful for all of us. And to speak even of social inclusion seems something that is not today the real focus of the, especially of mental health services. And even if the social inclusion is something that is fundamental for every project of recovery. You cannot start any project of recovery if you don't work on those three axes and work with real proposal, with real opportunities, with real thing, and not just talking about this. So what as public service, but also private service and NGO must do in our vision of the work and what we used to do in Trieste is to work on one side on giving a competent support, a supporting relationship, of course, especially in the crisis moment, but on the other side, activate and produce a system of opportunities. Concrete, real opportunities in work, in living, and in society to create a real context where people can live this kind of human rights and not just talk about it. To create this coming from the service is not something really simple, especially during this time when the resources are reduced, but it's something very important to improve and not to delegate to someone else, something else, to a welfare that is mostly reducing, is kind of investment on this kind of things. Working the service need to focus on the equity much more than equality. I mean, starting from the people left behind. We used to say in Trieste, if you start from the last left behind, you can guarantee the rights also for all the others. And so is our goal, our focus to start from the people that really has nothing, as I see is the goal of also of Banyan. We don't have time to speak a bit more about the programs we activate for work inclusion and socialization, and I want just to focus on the housing. The housing is also a main condition, is a precondition for all the others fundamental rights like safety, security, privacy, availability. So if you don't have a house, I repeat, for each one of us, not having a house could be a big challenge, and happen that the more fragile people, like people with mental health issue, migrants, other fragile people, are homeless. And this just aggravate, make even worse a situation that is already a bit very, not very simple. But the housing, the residential care, the residential accommodation has some issues. And Vandana yesterday mentioned about this. I really appreciate your question yesterday, how to move from an institution to a healing space. Because it's true, when I started to work in the mental health department, then I managed for more than 10 years the rehabilitation unit, and were already a good number of residential shelter residential facilities, quite good, were not awful. Not more than 8 people inside and clean, good professional working. But after 20 years of this structure, the people coming out from the psychiatric hospital when it was closed, of course, started to become a kind of small institution. All know each other, and normally this kind of shelter guests the more deprived people with less ability, and also maybe the more traditional way working professional are working there. So the risk is not necessary to patronize, but for sure to stop to be a place where people are pushed to emancipate, to evolve, to go somewhere else, but became very static. So we had the need to transform this situation, the third institutionalization, as Roberto said, and to move to something more personalized. And the goal was to make personal care for each one of the people with very severe mental health issues included in these facilities, and to move in smallest houses, 1, 2, 3 people, managed by social cooperative and not by mental health professional, or even with the support of some association, so more connected with the community, and moving with these people, the money that were allocated on the project, and start a different kind of support, very much personalized. Supported housing, the facilities risk to become a kind, as we said, of new institution. So it's true what you mentioned yesterday. It's very important to understand what really helped to move to a healing space. Now on this point, as I know, there are different kind of research. But my opinion is that it's very difficult to really evaluate the atmosphere, the climate inside facilities, because you can have some criteria, but the friendly approach is quite difficult to evaluate. Some research say that it's important that the house is like a home, not having invasive support, and keep the connection with the family, with the community, are all elements that help to deinstitutionalize the house. I agree with this, and in my experience, what really made the change when we moved a quite good number of people from some shelter to this small own house was the ownership. Ownership not necessarily means to be the owner, economically the owner of a house, but was much better when it happened, that was possible to do this, but that the person feels the owner of the place. This is my house, and if you want to come in, you have to knock on the door. I have the key of the house. This creates an incredible change. All of us, and working a long time, we were really surprised how this changed and improved the rehabilitation, the rehabilitative path in an unexpected way. Just a short example, a guy of about 70 years old, he spent some time in the previous psychiatric hospital, and then about 20 years in one of the shelter, the supportive facilities of 8 people, not something so bad. But when he moved, but when he moved to this own house, one house for himself, needing great support, was a cluster housing with the professional in a different flat, giving support in the day and in the night to all of them living close. He used to shout every night. And the first night, he was shouting also in this house. But The day after, we said, if you go on in this way, we are obliged to move you back where you were come. And the second night, he didn't shout. He understood very well that was at risk. Coincidence? I'm not sure. I don't think so. The last example, because the time is finished, and we have been in the project of Banyan 2 days ago. The canteen, we met Salish, is a restaurant managed. And he expressed in a few words, very clear and very simple, how is the idea of social inclusion. He said, we fight the stigma. People can find this being proud of what they do, money to be more free, and friendship of the people around. And they give us motivation. I think that these two words are very important. Reciprocity. So if you feel that your work, you put something in your work, but you have some feedback about what you are doing, and there is a reciprocity in the relationship, this change your attitude, your way to stay in your work. And you can be happy of your work. And the other is motivation. To be motivated is give a lot of energy. And in my opinion and experience, wherever there is even a small group of professionals and people that works cohesive around an ideology with motivation, this squeeze a lot of energy and give the strength to face some difficulty. I don't know if I can have a couple of minutes more. Thank you. So we made a lot of change and differentiated all the structure, all the houses, but no time, I don't go on it. But I want just to underline the importance of differentiate the project and to give a contribution to your question, Vandana. I think that the needs of the people change very much. Our needs change very much. Every day, I can say. So we cannot think that the project starting today, in 10 years, will be good for the person living there. So need to transform, to innovate. Innovation is fundamental to keep alive and avoid that the rules, very strong, of the institution overcome the needs of the people. And also the society is changed. And so the housing is not just the need of people with mental health, but it's a common need for multiple subjects. Migrants and new poverty and all people. This report of United Nations for age says that in 2050 the number of old people will be doubled, and 20% of it will be needing supported housing. So need to find new solutions, learn from our neighbors all the new, there are already new solutions, very creative, that need to be learned and reinforced and shared, and this sharing is fundamental. Keeping an eye on the sustainability of the health system, because if the need grows, okay. So I live on this word about the sustainability that for us is using the co-production and the collaborative approach with all the components of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mezzina, Dr. Pina. Very inspiring to hear about the history and the evolution of the Trieste approach, understanding more about the different ways in which you've implemented the whole life approach and your perspectives on person-centered care. And we do, of course, look forward to your session tomorrow on open dialogue as well. Just to move the session forward, we now have a video presentation by Dr. Deborah Padgett. Dr. Padgett will be speaking with us about the Housing First program based out of the USA. Dr. Padgett's an expert on the Housing First approach to ending homelessness and is joint first author of a book on Housing First as well.
All right. My name is Deborah Padgett. I'm in New York City. I'm so sorry that I couldn't make the conference. This is really a wonderful time to have the 4th International Conference with so much going on in the world today. And I want to thank Vandana, Mrinalini, and all of my friends there. I miss you. And I hope this presentation will help in some way. Let us join forces and work together. So I'm going to present my work primarily on Housing First, and we'll go through that fairly quickly. I know that questions and answers aren't possible in this recorded format, but I have my email at the end in case anyone would like to be in touch with me. So the title of the talk is Housing First in the US and Beyond, Working Together for Systems Change. I think I will hopefully come to show how Housing First began and prospered, but also there's only so much any program can do when you have structural problems, really, in working through a system and working with the very most poor, most vulnerable people living on the street. So Housing First, I put the power of numbers here because the research, several random controlled trials, many pre-post trials and so forth, but it's come in with a fairly consistent finding always that Housing First keeps people housed stably longer and doing better on a number of counts. To the right is a shameless plug for our book that came out in 2016 with my colleagues Ben Hinwood and then the founder of Pathways to Housing and Housing First, Sam Tsimberis. A way to really capture this is the phrase in green at the bottom. When you are drowning, your rescuer doesn't make you learn to swim first. This would be a wonderful saying for Housing First because there are minimal requirements to get in other than being homeless, having a serious mental illness, and needing help. So just in the world of, the elites and all the fancy people, I was pleasantly surprised that Housing First got named this year in the Time 100 most influential people in the country. And that person is Sam Tsimberis, whose photo is there. Sam founded it, and it says he changed the lives of tens of thousands of people from Houston to Helsinki. And basically, Housing First is considered housing is a basic human right. And Sam has been, without a doubt, the leader of this movement. But there are many of us as well who have joined in from around the world. So I want to point out where this comes from. Excuse me. We have in the United States and continue to have, although hopefully it's getting better, what's called an institutional circuit where homeless people, particularly chronic homeless people, find themselves in this horrible cycle of being in shelters and either going to jails or hospital detox units or back to the streets. And this circuit continues to go around and lock people into this horrible condition where they're criminalized with jail sentences, treated quickly in hospitals, usually heavily with medications, and then turned out to shelters, which are themselves not safe. In New York City, I can say that without a doubt. So along comes Pathways in 1992. That's Sam on the left hand in his younger days, doing outreach for homeless people in New York City, because by 1992, New York City had thousands, literally thousands of people on the streets suffering from serious mental illness and not getting any relief. So what Sam did is say, let's put people into Housing First and then work 24/7 around and with them to address their issues, mental illness, whether substance abuse and so forth. So the bottom picture is of a Housing First tenant in her apartment, excuse me, and one of the Housing First case managers talking to her. This is an essence of Housing First, is we bring the services to you and don't demand you come to us. So what Housing First did, and I say a service-intensive sector because I realize not every place deals with homelessness like New York City, which New York City spends billions of dollars, but pretty much keeps people on this staircase of going from homeless to shelter placement. If they're fortunate, they can go to transitional housing. And finally, but rarely, go to permanent housing. Housing First set aside all those additional steps and put people immediately into permanent housing. Okay, and this is along with treatment services. It's never housing only, and that's my next slide. It's a consumer choice model, but it is not housing only, and there is some expectation of service engagement. And there's also an expectation that the tenant in this apartment will maintain the rules of the apartment tenancy. So it's not as if Housing First clients are free to do whatever they want at any time. But it does say that maintaining the apartment is not contingent on abstinence. Housing First practices harm reduction, which means we do not forbid use of alcohol or drugs, but do work with the tenant to try to reduce the harm and make them on the road to recovery. So being clean and sober takes time. It's not as if you can demand they learn how to swim before you rescue them. And again, array of services are available. I end by saying, and this goes back to systems change, no program can fully reverse years of adversity and trauma in a short time. But it's our belief, and I believe there as well, with the Banyan, that a secure home is the best start. The staff of Housing First programs, you can see the list there. Assertive community treatment, which itself is a model of community treatment, which has been around for many decades. So in its early days, ACT was used as 24/7 assistance. The staff consisted of psychiatrists, social workers, case managers, housing, Pathways to Housing, it was called, was among the first to add nurse practitioners to the ACT teams to address physical health problems. There were housing specialists who did nothing but work with the landlords to ensure a smooth transition for Pathways to Housing tenants, and an array of other assistance, help in job seeking, building resumes. There were, to enrich their lives, there were free courses in photography, painting, writing, and of course, nutrition. So there's an array of services available. I go back to the, just a summary of the research on Housing First. It has been very consistent in showing housing stability far superior to the people in what we call the treatment first model, which is you have to earn your way into permanent housing. Higher residential stability, reductions in service utilization, kind of a break in that institutional circuit that we talked about earlier. Cost savings, less time in jails and hospitals, which in this country are extremely expensive. Improved sense of consumer choice, and also a reduced dependence on drugs and alcohol. So one of the things that my fellow researchers have really come up with, Dennis Culhane and others, is the line that it's more expensive to keep the status quo, running shelters, jail beds, hospital beds, and do nothing. That is more expensive than doing Housing First. Time and again, we've seen this. So I asked myself, time and again, why doesn't this catch on more? But I will say, in the past 10 years, it has caught on rapidly. It was always coming on since the early 2000s. Canada had a national randomized clinical trial, the At-Home Chez Soi project in 5 cities. Virtually all the countries in Western Europe are now doing Housing First and having regular conferences to talk about how they're doing, what they're doing. Some of them, like France, did randomized clinical trials. Most did more of a pre-post measurement, but all found the same thing, that people in Housing First stayed housing longer and had more stable lives. It's also spread to Australia and New Zealand. And last November, I was in Brazil to see what is going to be perhaps one of the first national rollouts of Housing First, because the Brazilian Prime Minister, Lula, is very much sold on Housing First. So we're in the very beginning phases of that, but it's very promising. And Chile has also started. So there are some aspects of Housing First that have to be kind of dealt with. One is, do we house people in single site and their shared accommodations with others, or scatter site where they have their own apartment? Housing First from its beginnings was scatter site. I hesitate to say that that has to be done because it doesn't, but in New York City, that was the way it worked. In Seattle, they chose to have a single building and put all the Pathways tenants in it. That brings its own issues, as well as scatter site. But scatter site is kind of the optimal way, but a single site is possible. One of the other fault lines is some homeless programs have trouble with harm reduction, particularly faith-based programs, and prefer sobriety only. If they do that, that is not Housing First, because we do have a fidelity measure, and among those is an assurance of harm reduction. Another fault line is you really have to provide services in the community, in the apartment of the tenant, rather than expect them to come to the clinic. This was a big issue with the Veterans Administration, where we had very good outcomes on Housing First. But the staff at the Veterans Administration had to get accustomed to leaving their offices and going out and meeting clients where they live. And also, it's a loss of professional power. It's a kind of redefinition of what it means to be a clinical social worker, a case manager, someone who really works with choice around what happens. I want to bring you to, this just happened 2 weeks ago. We are very concerned in the US because of this very conservative turn. As you can imagine, it's kind of heartbreaking to see it unrolling. And our Supreme Court, in all of its lack of supreme wisdom, ruled a few weeks ago that towns may arrest people for sleeping in public. In other words, a basic biological need of sleeping is withheld for people who have no place to live. This involves paying a fine, going to jail. Once you go to jail, you have a criminal record, and this sets in motion a sequel of negative events where landlords won't rent to criminals, employers won't hire criminals. This criminality is strictly made by the system to punish people for being homeless. It's very costly, though. I want to emphasize that doing this is very costly. These sweeps together, sweeps of homeless encampments, can cost millions of dollars to a city to do over a period of a year. So thank you, Supreme Court. Hopefully we will work through these issues on the local level and not arrest people for sleeping. But I do want to say, and I want to get up to the systems level, the structural level, and say that we do need, obviously, systems change. Prevention of homelessness is very important. We had an eviction moratorium during the pandemic, which was tremendously helpful in keeping people housed at a very stressful time and maintaining jobs and livelihoods. But nevertheless, it's hard to keep up with the population growth, the growth in the proportion of people who are in poverty, who are on the edge of homelessness or have fallen into it. We simply lack affordable housing in this country. The US government stopped producing or subsidizing affordable housing in the 80s under President Reagan, and it hasn't changed. So gradually over time, we are seeing fewer and fewer affordable housing units and more poor people, of whom more are becoming homeless. We lack jobs with living wages. We still have tremendous problems of social exclusion and stigma directed to homeless people, particularly those with mental illness. And again, I come back to the people that we've studied, and I've engaged in 2 long-term studies of pathways to housing compared to non-pathways. And all individuals reported some forms of adversity and trauma. So I do come back to the systems level and say that the limitations of what Housing First or any program can do cannot necessarily override what is ongoing a problem that we face. One is that people live much shorter lives. To be 50 years old and homeless is to already be old, the equivalent of 70 or 75 years old. This is in part due to poor physical health, injuries, traumatic backgrounds, and so forth. They lack work history and education because usually the onset of mental illness coincided with a time of pursuing education and kind of derailed people from that pursuit. Again, I'll bring up trauma, including child abuse. We heard many stories of this amongst those we interviewed in depth over a period of time. And also depleted social networks. I have to say, in the United States, we interviewed dozens and dozens of people who were in Pathways or in the other networks, but all of them suffered from a lack of social networks, either through HIV, through incarceration, through poor health. It was very difficult for them to have social support from family or even friends because of the cost of being poor and dying young. So the latest is that our homeless population is aging. The baby boom, as it's called, has reached that stage. And we're finding more and more that people we are helping on the streets are older. And by older, I mean 40s and 50s. And they have poor physical health. And programs are telling us their staff are not prepared for palliative care, for death of a client and what that does to the team, how to help them age in place. It's a very challenging situation. So just a slide quickly from Brazil from last fall. That sign on the table says nothing about us without us, which is a Brazilian phrase that has really caught on. And it was very gratifying to be there with formerly homeless people and with Ministry of Human Rights officials. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that the national rollout of Housing First will happen over the next year. I am finished. I don't know how long I took. I hope it was okay. I have my email address here and would welcome feedback or questions that you might have. I think the bottom line is a home makes all the difference in the world, and you don't require a person to learn to swim before you rescue them. Thank you, much appreciated, and I wish you all the best as the program proceeds. Thank you. All right, my name is Deborah Padgett. I'm in New York City. I'm so sorry that I couldn't make the conference. This is really...
Huge thanks to Dr. Padgett for taping the session for us. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here in person, but feel free to reach out to her if you have any questions. Up next, we have Dr. Sashidharan to deliver a short presentation on long-term care. Dr. S.P. Sashidharan is a consultant psychiatrist based in Glasgow in the UK and has worked in multiple roles within the NHS and in academia.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for asking me to make this further short intervention. This is about a new way of providing support for people with long-term, new way of providing support for people who have experienced long-term mental health difficulties based in London, in the United Kingdom. This is a project that I'm currently involved in, and what's interesting about this project is that it has come about as a result of the failure of the established mental health system to provide support and care for people from marginalized communities, in particular people from minority ethnic groups in the UK. The history behind it is long and well documented, and it shows that people of color in the UK, as indeed elsewhere in Europe, are experiencing severe levels of disadvantage and discrimination when they come into contact with the mental health system. As was mentioned yesterday during one of the presentations, the risk of being subjected to compulsory detention in hospital and long-term care is 8 to 10 times higher in people from marginalized communities, particularly from the black community. One of the conventional arguments that has been made within psychiatric literature is that people don't come to the services early enough, and as a result, they experience a significant long-term disability, which account for this excess of people from communities ending up in psychiatric hospitals. Argument here is that there is a problem within the communities in accessing care at the right stage. This led us to question whether this is true or not through systematic inquiries. What the community was telling us through extensive consultations was that is not the reason why we don't use mental health systems, but it's because the mental health system treats us badly. Our experience within the system is poor. We are not treated with respect. The models of care that are made available to us are entirely inappropriate. And they see us as requiring specialist interventions in specialist facilities. What we need is care based in our own homes, in the community. This is a famous cartoon or picture that was made by Ugo Guarino, right? Guarino, a cartoonist from Trieste who worked very closely with Franco Basaglia during the deinstitutionalization movement, saying that when the doors of the mental hospitals are open, people run away from that place. And the word liberty is therapeutic was based on this premise, that people like the freedom, and the freedom is necessary for people to recover. What we have found in the United Kingdom is, in the era of community care, the doors are open, the community systems are available, but individuals are still running away from the system. In the case of people from minority communities, marginalized communities, this is a fact that they do not wish to have treatment either in the hospital or through the community services. This led us to undertake a very detailed study within the local black communities, and this was published a couple of years ago, whether the issue around access is relevant and whether conventional models in addressing treatment delay should be applied to this community. What I'm going to show you is a little animation that summarizes the results of this, which identifies the key issues facing our communities in countries like the United Kingdom. This short animation summarizes the findings of the particular research.
Experiences and outcomes in mental health care, despite 40 years of evidence highlighting inequalities. If we have all the evidence, why does nothing change? Researchers from the University of Bristol, Glasgow and Kiel reviewed all the published and unpublished evidence on experiences of communities, service users and mental health professionals. Here's what was found. People from ethnic minority communities are already at higher risk of mental ill health due to experiences of social, economic and racial oppression. These experiences disempower individuals and do not allow space for vulnerability. When individuals experience mental ill health, they do not feel like the current model of care can help them. Services are perceived to be unhelpful. Communities do not feel like it's worth taking the risk to access a service where they are not seen as a whole person and where they fear they may be harmed by Eurocentric, racist, and biomedical approaches to care and treatment. Stigmatizing diagnoses threaten the identities of individuals, families, and communities. As a result, they enter the service as a last resort. The system itself is seen to be based on a rocky biomedical Eurocentric foundation that locates mental illness in the individual rather than in the conditions that individuals find themselves in, and is unable to provide person-centred care to ethnically diverse communities. Everyone in the mental health ecosystem, including carers, service users, psychiatrists, nurses and therapists, find themselves battling against this system to receive or provide appropriate care. Service users experience poor listening, disempowering clinical encounters, re-traumatization, violence, inequitable treatment, and over-reliance on medication. Services are experienced as a form of epistemic injustice and violence. Epistemic injustice is injustice related to knowledge. It includes silencing of voices, misrepresenting or undervaluing individuals' experience or contribution, and unfair authority and distrust. These experiences exacerbate feelings of distress in patients. Services are described as Eurocentric and old-fashioned, and seen to perpetuate racial injustice through the pathologisation of cultural behaviours. Professionals, including psychiatrists, feel inhibited in a system where it does not feel safe or acceptable to talk about religion or spirituality with their patients without being judged by their colleagues. And they feel silenced when they witness racism in diagnostic and treatment decision-making. Service users, carers, and mental health professionals feel that a radical change is needed. Service users value non-judgmental understanding and culturally capable practitioners, talking therapy and trauma-informed therapy. There is a need for a new model of care that better reflects the needs of ethnically diverse patients. This requires statutory services to share their power and acknowledge the lived experience and expertise of service users and the third sector. These organisations provide safe, non-stigmatising spaces for expression of emotional distress and are more responsive to oppressive causes of illness. This includes taking a holistic and empowering approach to assessment, care, treatment and recovery. So, what's next? For more information about the study, including recommendations, visit the link below.
This snapshot is relevant not just to the experience of marginalized communities. This, in a microcosm, is what is happening to mental health services in general in most Western European countries, certainly true in the United Kingdom. The mental health system is failing all communities. By any index of recovery, you can see the current mental health provisions, although adequately funded, sufficiently resourced, and highly staffed, are failing to deliver the outcomes that we expect them, reasonably expect them to do. We are not engaging people sufficiently to make it possible for the existing system to bring about the changes that are required. Has led our government to rethink mental health services. But it's not this 40 years of evidence that has prompted it. It was a recent incident in the United Kingdom, in the city of Nottingham, where a man with a long history of severe mental illness with multiple admissions to hospital was abandoned by the system, although he was under requirements to comply with treatment, and unfortunately ended up in a major tragedy. Years of scientific evidence and research had not prompted the government to take action. But because of the outcry in the media, the government is now looking at different ways of working with people from all backgrounds in the mental health system. Unfortunately, the immediate response from the government is to suggest that we should have more control and more coercion within the mental health system. And the fundamental difficulty here is that people are not voluntarily using the mental health service, so there should be more extensive powers to ensure that people remain in contact with services. However, there is also a very strong argument that we should finally accept that the current model of care has failed and that we should look at alternative services which actually meet the needs of the people. One example of this is a service that we have set up over the last 4 years, not in the conventional mental health spaces, but in a local church. This is in London, in Tooting in London, where the local church, this is a black Pentecostal church in an area, hugely deprived area, with major problems with the local mental health service. If you go to the local community mental health center, you can see people who don't wish to be there. But if you come to the Sunday congregation of this church, you can see 700, 800 people, mostly people with mental health difficulties or their families coming and seeking help. The same picture can be seen if you go to the local mosque or if you go to the local Gurudwara, where people with mental health problems are seeking help and support. What this project has tried to do is to set up mental health support and help, including recruiting people from the local families and paying them to look after people with mental health problems when they are in crisis. This model, which actually recruits people from the local community to work within the system, providing them with the training and support and the capabilities to work with the local communities. And increasingly, we have demonstrated that the uptake of these services far outstrips the numbers of people who are using the conventional mental health services. You can see the engagement levels across all communities. Majority community as well as minority community has increased. Not only that, within the group of people who come to these services, a significant proportion, 50 to 55% of the people, in fact, have history of contact with the local services and have dropped out of the services. And many of them are seriously unwell, and their families bring them to us rather than take them to the established services. With the help of the established services, we are able to provide them with help and support in these facilities and safer places in the community. This is a small model, an example of something that is likely to be extended across the City of London. In addition to that, another ray of hope for mental health services in the United Kingdom is the adoption or the attempt to adopt the model that we heard about from Roberto, Mezzina and Pina. The model that has been developed in a high-income country that has proved to be highly effective and which has survived 40 years for a variety of political and ideological reasons has been resisted in many other European countries. Although the evidence is at our door as to what works effectively, over 40 years in Italy, the reluctance of the British system to accept that. In the last 12 months, there has been a decision to try and pilot the Trieste style projects in 5 centers in UK. We will hear more about that, hopefully later on, from Roberto, who is leading that program in the UK. And we will try and triangulate innovations such as that with the smaller scale innovations like the one that we are involved in London. Although the situation looks grim, and although tragedies continue to happen, and despite the reluctance of the government to engage with the real issues in mental health care, there are possibilities that things might change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sashidharan, for being here with us and providing that perspective.